Odoric of Pordenone, OFM, also known as Odorico Mattiussi or Mattiuzzi, was an Italian late medieval Franciscan friar and missionary explorer. His account of his visit to China was an important source for the account of John Mandeville. Many of the incredible reports in Mandeville have proven to be garbled versions of Odoric's eyewitness descriptions. Odoric was born at Villanova, a hamlet now belonging to the town of Pordenone in Friuli, in or about 1286. He came from the Italian family of the Mattiuzzi, one of the families in charge of defending the town of Pordenone in the name of Ottokar II, King of Bohemia. This later gave rise to the unsubstantiated rumors that the family was of Bohemian origin. According to the ecclesiastical biographers, in early years he took the vows of the Franciscan order and joined the convent at Udine, the capital of Friuli. In 1296 Odoric went as a missionary to the Balkans, and then to the Mongols in southern Russia. Friar Odoric was dispatched to the east in April 1318. Starting from Padua, he went to Constantinople via Venice and then crossed the Black Sea to Trebizond. Further he traveled and preached in Armenia, Media, and Persia. In all these countries the Franciscans had founded mission centers. From Sultaniye he proceeded by Kashan and Yazd, and turning thence followed a somewhat indirect route by Persepolis and the Shiraz and Baghdad regions, to the Persian Gulf. With another friar, James of Ireland, as his companion, he sailed from Ormuz to India, landing at Tana, near Mumbai. At this city 4 Franciscan friars, 3 of them Italian and the 4th a Georgian, had suffered martyrdom shortly before their arrival at the hands of the Muslim governor. The bones of the martyred friars had been collected by Friar Jordanus Catalani, a Dominican who carried them to Supra, the Sippara of the ancient geographers, near the modern Vasai, about 26 miles north of Bombay, and buried them there. Odoric tells that he disinterred these relics and carried them with him on his further travels. He also visited Puri, giving one of the earliest accounts of the chariot festival of the Hindu god Jagannath to the Western world in his own account of 1321. Odoric reported how the people put the idols on chariots, and the king and queen and all the people drew them from the church with song and music. From India Odoric sailed in a junk to Sumatra, visiting various ports on the northern coast of that island, and thence to Java, to the coast of Borneo, to Kampa, and to Guangzhou, at that time known as Jingkala, Great China. From Guangzhou he traveled overland to the great ports of Fukien, at one of which, then called Zaitan-Xiamen Harbor. He founded 2 houses of his order. In one of these he deposited the bones of the brethren who had suffered in India. From Fuzhou Odoric struck across the mountains into Zhejiang and visited Hangzhou, which he knew as Kanzi, from its former euphemistic status as the temporary residence of the southern Song Court. It was at the time one of the great cities of the world, and Odoric, like Marco Polo, Marignoli, and Ibn Battuta, gives details of its splendors. Passing northward by Nanjing and crossing the Yangtze, Odoric embarked on the Grand Canal and traveled to the headquarters of the Great Khan at Kamblek within present-day Beijing. He remained there for 3 years, probably from 1324 to 1327. He was attached, no doubt, to one of the churches founded by the Franciscan Archbishop John of Monte Corvino, at this time in extreme old age. He also visited Yangzhou, where Caterina Vigliani's tombstone was found. Odoric did not return to Italy till the end of 1329 or the beginning of 1330, but, as regards intermediate dates, all that we can deduce from his narrative or other evidence is that he was in Western India soon after 1321, and that he spent 3 years in China, between the opening of 1323 and the close of 1328. On one of his trips, his ship was nearly capsized by a typhoon, but they landed safely in Bolinao, Pangasinan, Philippines. He is said to have held a mass there, in around 1324, that would have predated the Mass celebrated in 1521 by Ferdinand Magellan, which is generally regarded as the first Mass in the Philippines by some 197 years. However, historian William Henry Scott concluded after examining Odoric's writings about his travels that he likely never set foot on Philippine soil, and, if he did, there is no reason to think that he celebrated Mass. Odoric's return voyage is less clearly described. Returning overland across Asia, through the land of Prester John and through Kassan, the adventurous traveler seems to have entered Tibet, and even perhaps to have visited Lhasa. After this we trace the friar in northern Persia, in Milistort, once famous as the land of the assassins, in the Elburz highlands. No further indications of his homeward route are given, though it is almost certain that he passed through Tabriz. The vague and fragmentary character of the narrative in this section forcibly contrasts with the clear and careful tracing of the outward way. During a part at least of these long journeys, the companion of Odoric was James of Ireland, an Irishman, as appears from a record in the public books of Udine, showing that shortly after Odoric's death a present of 2 marks was made to this Irish friar, Sociobo Fratris Odorici, Amor Dei Odorici. Shortly after his return, Odoric betook himself to the manoriate house attached to the friary of Saint Anthony at Padua, and it was that in May 1330 he related the story of his travels, which was taken down in homely Latin by Friar William of Solagna. Traveling towards the papal court at Avignon, Odoric fell ill at Pisa, and turning back to Udine, the capital of his native province, died there. Odoric in context. Odoric's journey is perhaps best seen as a diplomatic mission, in addition to its religious dimensions. Nearly a century earlier, Mongols had entered Europe itself in the Mongol invasion of Europe. Between 1237 and 1238 they pillaged most of Russia, and by 1241 they had devastated Poland and Hungary. Then they suddenly retreated. Pope Innocent IV organized the first missions to the Great Khan Tartary in 1254, entrusted to the Franciscans, as were subsequent papal missions over the next century. Niccolo, Matteo, and Marco Polo made 2 voyages in 1260 and 1271, and in 1294 the missionary John of Monte Corvino made a similar journey for Pope Nicholas IV. Contemporary fame of his journeys. The fame of his vast journeys appears to have made a much greater impression on the laity of his native territory than on his Franciscan brethren. The latter were about to bury him, without delay or ceremony, but the Gastel, the chief magistrate of the city, interfered and appointed a public funeral. Rumors of his wondrous travels and of posthumous miracles were diffused, and excitement spread like wildfire over Friuli and Carniola. The ceremony had to be deferred more than once, and at last took place in presence of the Patriarch of Aquileia and all the local dignitaries. Popular acclamation made him an object of devotion. The municipality erected a noble shrine for his body, and his fame as saint and traveler had spread far and wide before the middle of the century. But it was not till 4 centuries later that the papal authority formally sanctioned his beatification. A bust of Odoric was set up at Pordenone in 1881. The numerous copies of Odoric's narrative that have come down to our time, chiefly from the 14th century, show how speedily and widely it acquired popularity. It does not deserve the charge of mendacity brought against it by some, though the adulation of others is nearly as injudicious. Odoric's credit was not benefited by the liberties which Sir John Mandeville took with it. The substance of the knight's alleged travels in India and China is stolen from Odoric, though amplified with fables from other sources and from his own invention, and garnished with his own unusually clear astronomical notions. We may indicate a few passages which stamp Odoric as a genuine and original traveler. He is the first European, after Marco Polo, who distinctly mentions the name of Sumatra. The cannibalism and community of wives which he attributes to certain races of that island certainly belong to it, or to islands closely adjoining. His description of Sago in the archipelago is not free from errors, but they are the errors of an eyewitness. In China, his mention of Guangzhou by the name of Senskalim, and his descriptions of the custom of fishing with tame cormorants, of the habit of letting the fingernails grow extravagantly, and of the compression of women's feet, are peculiar to him among the travelers of that age. Marco Polo amidst them all. Many people say that his embarkments were far more memorable than those of Marco Polo, for Odoric was one who not only discovered many countries, but wrote about them so that he could share his knowledge with others. Beatification. Moved by the many miracles that were wrought at the tomb of the Odoric, Pope Benedict XIV, in the year 1755, approved the veneration which had been paid to blessed Odoric. In the year 1881 the city of Pordenone erected a magnificent memorial to its distinguished son. Manuscripts and published editions. 73 manuscripts of Odoric's narrative are known to exist in Latin, French and Italian. Of these the chief, of about 1350, is in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. Paris calls Lingua Inculturi Rosa. Giovanni Battista Ramusio first includes Odoric's narrative in the second volume of the second edition, in which are given two versions, differing curiously from one another, but without any prefatory matter or explanation. Another version is given in the Acta Sanctorum under the 14th of January. A curious discussion before the papal court respecting the beatification of Odoric forms a kind of blue book issued ex typographia rare, Cameri Apostolici. Friedrich Kunstmann of Munich devoted one of his papers to Odoric's narrative. Some editions of Odoric are: Giuseppe Veni, Elogio Storico el Gesta del Beato Odorico. Henry Yule in Cathay and the Way Thither, Volume I, pp. 1–162, Volume E, Appendix, pp. 1–42. Hakluyt Society. Henry Cordier, Les Voyages du Frère Odoric. Available at the Internet Archive. Teofilo Domenichelli, Sopra le vita e viaggi del Beato Odorico da Pordenone dell'Ordine de Minori. Text embedded in the Storia Universal del Missionary Franciscan, by Marcellino da Civezza, E. 739–781. Text embedded in Richard Hakluyt's Principal Navigations, E. 39–67. John of Victoring in Fontes Rerum Germanicarum, ed. J. F. Boehmer, Volume I, ed. by J. G. Cotter, p. 391. Luke Wadding, An Almanorum, A.D. 1331, Volume 7, pp. 123–126. Bartholomew Ranonico Opus Conformitatum. B. Francisci, B.K. I. Par. E. Conf. 8. John of Winterthur in a card, Corpus Historicum Medii AVI, Volume I. Coles, 1894–1897, especially 1894. C. R. Beasley, Dawn of Modern Geography, E. 250 to 287, 548 to 549, 554, 565 to 566, 612 to 613. Works cited. Popular translations: Odoric of Pordenone, translation by Sir Henry Yule, introduction by Paolo Chiesa, The Travels of Friar Odoric.